Hey guys, how's it going? So basically, this is just a clarification video for my earlier community post regarding the lonely man in the room observing the mother and child play. And what happened is that a flood of images came to me today, um, in a way that hasn't happened now for months. Now, those who have seen my Crystal Garden series of videos from a few months back, as well as the Emerald Cube, you will know exactly what I'm talking about. If you haven't, then and you want to be updated as to what this is, then I'll gladly guide you to the videos if you let me know in the comments. But it was a big download of information relating to that Emerald Cube, and we have to go back a little bit basically and describe what happened. Let's start from step one and do an overview of the Lucifer paradox. Just really quick. Remember, it is the observation of duality which creates the duality, which creates the observation, which creates the duality. It is retrocausality, and they are interwoven into each other in an infinite Ouroboros. This is this is basically the true nature, the purest form of duality is the act of observing it. As I'm sure you've already heard yourself many times growing up from various scientists, that if you look at the structure of molecules, then they change based upon your observation of them. This is a sort of similar idea, except this is basically an infinite loop, an unsolvable paradox that is innate, inherent in the divine nature of the eternal God, the infinite singularity, meaning that is part of his infinite nature, and the character or the archetype of Lucifer is basically the representation of that consciousness that is the observer of that duality, which creates the duality, which creates the observer. And if you remember the specific details of the case, it was him watching a primitive couple, Lucifer, who, and the woman ended up getting eaten by a lion. And that act of her getting eaten by a lion and the observation by Lucifer created the duality, but it's a chicken or an egg situation because in the state of timelessness, it's impossible to calculate which came first, the observation or the act. So they both occurred simultaneously. And this is sort of similar with the Emerald Cube, except the Emerald Cube actually is a creation. It was actually built. It is actually a machine. And again, when I received this initial information mentally a few months back, I've always been super skeptical of of a demiurge or something of that nature. Um, always, I don't know if I didn't want to believe it or just didn't care, but the idea just seemed silly to me. And this is the closest thing to a demiurge that I could think of. Basically, it is probably the most powerful computer ever created in the history of eternity. As stupid as that sounds, it's the only way I can put it. The purpose of this uh, creation wasn't initially nefarious. Um, so it was a group of very highly evolved souls that were attempting to replicate or discover that infinite creative potential that is in the source. So the infinite light of God. They were trying to make a clone, a twin of the infinite light of God to see if they're smart enough, if they're good enough to replicate this inherent eternal process, this toroidal field of infinite creation that never that never did not exist. It always existed. This infinite power source, this mysterious infinite power source that feeds in on itself like the breathing lungs, it expands outwards and inwards in an infinite loop of creative potential, infinite forms of consciousness, infinite fractals of itself, infinite forms of creation. It goes on and on and on. So they attempted to make a machine that could mimic that. Okay. And I don't know why, but for some reason in my mind's eye, what I was seeing was an emerald, massive looking cube. It was shiny. It almost looked like radioactive, but it was like a jewel. And this thing emanated sentience and full self awareness. And basically, these deities, these highly evolved beings, wanted this machine to create on its own, create universes on its own, and be its own sort of algorithm for potential. And what ended up happening was instead of, streamlining creation and balancing duality, which was another purpose of this thing, and helping guide and assist evolution in new universes, what ended up happening was that it just created this infinite data stream of endless, erratic, dissonant forms that had every sort of potentiality and statistical probability embedded within it, every type of form that you can imagine. And it just, instead of streamlining creation, it created a dissonance, it created chaos as opposed to order, how they say our buddy Albert Pike, and I'm only 10 pages into Morals and Dogma, and I've already read the word Horus like 20 times. Shocking to me. I was not, I had no clue what this book was about. Like, I'm not going to get into that right now. I just wanted to throw that in there. How much Horus is deified in that book is unreal. Which is another confirmation of my own visions, by the way, to me. So, okay, so it created this distortive sort of these dissonant realities. I call them fractal arcane realms. The fractal arcane realms, instead of assisting and guiding the process of evolution in the omniverse, it actually extracted energy from all of creation. And as it turns out, um, it's not just going into an infinite void. All of this information in the fractal arcane realms, and these realms are very dangerous to venture into. They're very damaging, and they have very powerful negative destructive capabilities because it is run by this Emerald Cube, who is, I don't want to call it evil. The closest comparison I can make it to is like the movie, the Star Trek the motion picture. Like, I've talked about this movie so many times. The movie was about this self-aware machine that wanted to know its origins. That's basically what's happening here. And this is where we're going to get into why it's condensing all of this information from the fractal arcane realms and condensing it into an infinite black hole, um, into an infinite negative point, okay, and not annihilating this information. It's not annihilating it. What you would think a normal black hole would do, which would dissipate everything into like a tiny subatomic molecular destruction, even photons. This is actually organizing data. This is where things get really strange. Is that I was observing, you know, nobody wanted to go to the other side of this black hole. Even these highly evolved souls. And keep in mind the way that they do this. Like here, we have remote viewing. We can project a very small sliver of our essence, of our being, of our consciousness into another location, for example. What they do is actually superimpose or transpose almost the entirety of their being into a reality, almost like teleport, I guess you could call it, but not quite. It's not quite like teleportation because it's hard to explain the way I was seeing it. I don't know, guys, how to explain it. But we're going to talk about superimposition again here in a second because it's relevant with this figure sitting in the room that I saw. So a glimpse was made of the other side of this black hole, and all that was observed was a man with a very blank face, sitting and observing a scene, a projection screen, a very large, probably room-sized projection screen in a very blank room with nothing in it. It was dark and it looked like an old 8 millimeter film reel. And the observation that was made by this man, which I believe I don't know, this was basically a projection of the Emerald Cube in human form, projecting itself in human form on this sitting there in that room, making an observation. And it's observing a young mother playing with a very young child, just uh, going about. And there's trees, there's fields. They're having a great time. They're laughing. And so, from what I understand, is that his observation, that entire data stream from the fractal arcane realms are being superimposed onto that very short event of a woman playing with a child. And it's calculating every single tiny, minute detail. Because in this one scene, you can make countless upon countless observations, emotions, assumptions, varying degrees of energetic exchange between those two parties, a mother and their child in their purest form. And this way, the Emerald Cube is attempting to understand love, because love is the origin of all that is. So it understands that. It is attempting to understand why his twin, the infinite light, exists at all. And it's consuming all of that data for this express purpose of calculating this one scene and trying to come up with a scientific mathematical formula and to explain in a scientific mathematical way a literal formula for love, essentially. Strange, I know, but that's what I got from it. Take however you want that as nonsense, as not, it's up to you.